So I'm really excited about this one. It's inspired by my trip. We're going to make a filled croissant, and I don't know what I'm going to call it yet. It's inspired by a bakery originally in Barcelona, Spain, Pasteleria Hoffman. They're known for pastries in particular, and they have this amazing tiramisu-like croissant that's filled with a sweet mascarpone cream, and it's then dipped and glazed in a coffee glaze and finished with a little bit of cocoa powder. I learned this from a baker named Hannah Kwan, who has this on her menu here in the US. And now you can find her in Hawaii. So if you happen to find yourself in Hawaii, look up Hannah Kwan and get some Barcelona croissants. I'm doing my own twist because neither of these bakeries make sourdough croissants. And so we're going to fill our sourdough croissants and have a sourdough Barcelona croissant. I might choose a different name, I don't know yet. But for starters, I flipped all my croissants. Now I'm going to create the hole, which is going to be 2 holes on the bottom side. That means I can fill them from 2 halves and it creates a more even filling. We've been wanting to do this for a while. We had cruffins on our menu. The word cruffin is trademarked, so we called ours scruffins since they were sourdough. They basically are in the form of muffins, but they're made with croissant dough and they're filled, any sort of filling that you conceptualize. Since I'm testing these, I'm going to slit a couple of these instead of doing X's and see which one I prefer. I'm worried that the X's could potentially open up too much or cause some spilling, so maybe just a slit will be fine. So these are now prepared and going to be ready for filling. I will use a scale as a reference, but I'm not going to weigh every single croissant because if we're serious about putting these on the menu, we can't possibly do that. But I do need the scale at first to get an idea of, how much filling goes in each one. I'm aiming for 50 grams of filling in each one. And before I get carried away, I need to make the filling. So, super simple. One of the things that I found really attractive about this formula. Obviously, at scale, I'm going to use larger vats of mascarpone, both for costing and nuisance of opening up unnecessary packages and producing more plastic waste. But I just ran to a local grocery store and picked up the standard retail containers of mascarpone cheese. The filling has 2 ingredients. It's just mascarpone cheese and powdered sugar, affectionately known in the kitchen world as 10x. So if you've ever wondered what 10x stands for, if you read a formula, this means powdered sugar. I don't know the origin story. This is not going to be an inexpensive product. Mascarpone cheese gets very pricey very quickly. So just in doing this, what I'm trying to do today, at retail cost, I'm adding $2 of ingredient cost to each croissant by filling them and glazing them. But I can probably do a little bit better than that by the end by buying in bulk and buying from, a wholesale supplier rather than just going to the grocery store. But if it's $2 in extra ingredient cost, and of course there's more labor involved than just putting a plain croissant in the case, the finish is important. People are getting this for the detail of it, and so all of this matters. I don't know how much powdered sugar to use. It is a sort of feel thing, so we're gonna start at a measure. I'm adding 100 grams first for 3 containers of this mascarpone. I have no idea if that will be too little. I'm going to taste, and I'm also going to try to understand the final texture. This would be better in a smaller bowl. I don't have any smaller bowls. I have one, but it's got another plan already. It's on my table here. I figured these will end up in a piping bag. So really I'm just mixing to taste here, and by agitating that mascarpone, I'm bringing up its temperature. It'll be a little easier to manage. So it's already got a good amount of sweetness, and now I'm going to be a little bit more conservative in my increments. So I'll start with 20 more grams. Mascarpone on its own is pretty neutral. The powdered sugar will thicken, it'll change the consistency a little bit. Usually powdered sugar is used to thicken fillings, glazes, that kind of thing, but it's mostly for the flavor. Pretty happy with that. So I'll make sure to note that for myself later on, the amount of sugar that I added to 3 tubs of the mascarpone. And that's that. Now I have to make the glaze. It's also super easy. So the glaze is primarily powdered sugar. In this case, I might go a little higher. I want enough glaze that I can dip into. So I'm actually starting with 300 grams and adding a can of cold brew from a local coffee roaster, Press Coffee. They're our neighbors. So if this works out, this is also an excellent way of featuring a local coffee. So far I'm at a 1-to-3 ratio here, meaning 1 part coffee, 3 parts powdered sugar. I don't know if that's the right ratio yet. That won't be clear until I'm done. I want that glaze to, I want to, of course, incorporate all the powdered sugar, and I want the glaze to be relatively runny so that it evenly coats the whole croissant. So it takes a little bit of an effort. I probably could benefit from the whisk. Maybe I'll even incorporate the whisk. One of our staff actually brought this whisk in. It's sort of shame on us for not providing a standard, decent whisk. We have a weird one that's like made of plastic that I really dislike. Not sure if it's worth it. It's going a little fast for me and it's going to make a big mess. But I would prefer the whisk to the spoon. So maybe I'll just get this attachment and use it like a regular whisk. There we go. It's a little easier to incorporate all the powdered sugar this way. I feel like I got really the consistency that I wanted kind of on the first go. So maybe that 1-to-3 is good. It's got a decent runniness to it, but it still seems to adhere to the surface. It might even be a little thin. We'll see. And the only way we're going to know is by potentially sacrificing the first pastry. So I want to be able to kind of work efficiently. So what I'm going to do is fill my piping bag with the filling and get that ready. I know I'm happy with that. By no means am I an expert at handling piping bags. If you're looking for advice from me there, I've still got a lot to learn. This was an area that we pretty much avoided in the garage because our bakery was a cottage bakery at the time. So we needed to avoid anything that wasn't shelf stable. So these kinds of more fancy fillings and things were not areas that we could really experiment in. Scissors are significantly preferable for this process. I want a big enough opening at the end that I can stick this bag into the croissants. Do a quick glove change. And for now I'm filling one, and I'm going to dip that one and see if I'm happy with the result before I continue. All of these look pretty good, but I'm going to take one that's a little uglier and start there. By uglier in this case, I just mean a little smaller. So before I get going, weigh the pastry. Just get an idea of how much filling we're putting in. Usually you shouldn't need a tip here. This part of the process is not in my expertise yet, filling things, but part of being better as a baker is expanding your horizons. I did get very close to 50, so that makes me happy. And now I'm going to take this and dip it and then move on. So first we have to kind of see how this one does and just get an idea of whether in fact our glaze is where it needs to be. Part of me has the impression that it's a little bit on the thin side because I'm not getting the most even of coating, getting a little bit of pooling on this. I'll increase the amount of powdered sugar, 20 grams to start. Slightly thicker now. See if that gets me where I want to be. I'm going to fill another. So far I like the X's better. And the slits is able to get a little deeper into the pastry. I also don't think that it's so important to weigh each one because if you kind of get in the rhythm of pinching the end of the pastry bag, you're going to pinch a similar amount in the pastry bag as long as you're using the same size pastry bag each time. So let's see how this one does. Ooh, that's a much better result, at least so far. See, this one looks just like a regular croissant again. Granted, the glaze didn't spill, it's there, it's just not very thick. Hopefully this one stays a little more glazed. We're gonna keep this a little slow so that we can sort of measure as we go. I can now pretty safely fill everything, but I might still make an adjustment to the glaze. So let's go through and fill all of them. So once again, I'm going to find some consistency for myself by pinching off the end and filling it there. I only really made enough for the 12 croissants, so I'll also know how I did by how well I do preserving this filling to the end. I'm quite certain I'll be trialing this a number of more times. This is literally my first attempt doing this, and one of my first attempts really at filling croissants to begin with. It's not something that we've been doing a lot of, again, having started as a cottage bakery. It's a bit of a challenge to get the tip dipped deep enough. I'm noticing that if you don't, that it's sort of much harder to fill. Glaze isn't really setting yet either, so it sort of yields a couple questions. How important is it to do this while the croissants are still hot? I might need a layer of heat there in order to help the glaze set. And so I might be, doing this too late in the game by using cooled off croissants. If I don't get the glaze to set the way I want, that would be my assumption. And I can still actually correct for that pretty easily by simply warming them back up. Let's do that with half, sort of test that assumption. Okay, so we're just gonna let the oven warm these up a little bit. Again, I truly don't know that this matters or makes a difference. If we have to dip only warm pastry, it will make it a lot harder to do this special than if we can let the pastry cool down and then dip it. So we'll see how much of an effect that has. I guess what I'm looking for in the final product is sort of like you might expect a glazed donut to look, where you get the impression that something's going on top, which I don't know how I feel about these yet, whether they've met that mark or not. I guess I'll taste them too before we finish and draw some new conclusions. So these now are warm. And again, I'm doing this just to rule out that whether warmth matters in this process. But I'm going to start with the warm ones in terms of dipping. I just cannot imagine that this can be that big of a factor, because if it was, then ensuring that you have warm enough pastry upon dipping would be a bit of a chore and would really cause this to be an extremely time-sensitive process. So I guess I'm hoping that the warm pastry has nothing to do with the glaze setting, and I just need to make a thicker glaze. Could also be that the warm pastry makes life harder for me. I'm also at these ones that I slitted and didn't fully form X's. Now that I'm doing this, I definitely think that you should be generous with the holes that you make in your pastry. That way it's a little easier to get this filling in there. One last one, and it looks like I did decent to preserve just enough filling for the job. So back to testing this glaze, seeing if I need to do anything with it. In both cases, my glaze so far has not really left a notable change, meaning I can see that it's shiny, which is fine. I guess that's what a glaze is. It doesn't look like a layer of brown on top of the croissant dough. So you don't visually see, oh, this is a coffee flavored croissant. Rather you see just a shiny type croissant. So for the sake of testing, we know that starting in this corner and working around, we're going to get basically thicker on the glaze as we go. So I'm going to add another 20 grams. See if that matters. I'm starting to actually believe that no matter what I do with this glaze, it's going to basically just be a shine at the end instead of a true brown finish. And I might do some further testing to verify that. The real result is going to be in the taste. So there's all of my warm ones. Let's see how my fully cooled down ones do. Might be running out. Easy enough to whip up more. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and do the finishing work. A little cocoa dusting, kind of gotta stay there. The rest of them are still very wet versus these originals, which I will now move over to the finished tray. And I guess this one can be my own tester while I wait for these to cool down. So let's consider this the final taste test here. And with the rest of these, when they cool down, I'm gonna transfer them to the nice tray and give one to each of the teammates if they like them, then go from there. Since this is my own personal croissant, I'm going to do this with just my hands. See how the filling came out? Okay, got a nice little filling on both ends. Pretty convincing. Let's give it a bite. It's quite nice. I still wonder about that top and whether I can get it to set a little bit more so that it's a bit more obvious what I'm trying to do here. But all the flavor components are there. I get that coffee, I get that mascarpone, and the cocoa. And it's a really nice balance with the whole sourdough croissant. So cheers to this. I'm pretty happy with the initial taste. Now we'll just have to work on the presentation side.